One man, 365 days, 50 states, and 418 parks. We'll have that story next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. Today we're going to hear about one man's journey through the national park system. Please welcome our guest today. That's Andy Magee. Hi, Andy.
Hi, very nice to meet you.
Should I say welcome back?
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, nice to be back in St. Louis.
This is the most incredible story. You went on a journey, as I said in the intro there, one man, 365 days, 50 states, 418 parks. So bottom line, you visited all the parks all the national parks in the United States in 1 year.
That's right. I visited all the units of the national park system in 1 year. It was a bit of a challenge to see if I could do it. I didn't know if anybody had ever done it before, and set out and I did it.
Had anyone done it before?
As it turns out, there are a couple of people who've done it before. A couple of people who visited all the units at whatever given moment they that did their trips. The National Park Service adds new units almost every year. And in fact, when I started my trip, there were 418. And in the middle of my trip, we added another one. So by the time I ended, there were 419.
Where's the new one?
The new one's in California. It's called Tule Lake National Monument. And it's one of 4 National Park Service sites that are dedicated to the history of Japanese American internment during World War II.
Oh, wow. Is every park different? I mean, they could be just completely different concepts and things, right?
There's a lot of variety within the national park system, but there are a lot of parks that are similar, especially like the Civil War battlefield parks. While they're all individual in their own way, they really tell a collective story about the Civil War, and there's quite a few of those.
So what you did was visit them, photograph them, write about them. Tell me what your list was to do at every park you went to.
It was actually very simple. I collected national park passport stamps, if you're familiar with those.
I'm not.
So, yeah, at the visitor center, you can get a stamp that has the name of the park, the date that you were there, and I have a book that I've collected all of these in. So it's a way of documenting your visit. So that was one of the things that I wanted to do at each park. And the second was just to be able to get access to the park, to see it, spend as much time as I would like. Some visits for smaller parks could be fairly short, an afternoon or a couple of hours. Some visits in some of the larger places with more to see and do, I would spend 2 or 3 days.
Well, you began your journey in January of 2019.
That's right.
And what day did you get back?
I began on January 1st, and I finished on New Year's Eve. So the entirety of 2019.
How many miles did you put on your car?
I drove 72,000 miles. The total mileage for the trip was about 100,000 miles if you include air flights and boat time.
So did you blog about this? Are you making a book about it? What's going to happen?
I did. I set up a website before the trip, and I posted blogs about every 10 days, just sort of capturing moments along the trip. Lots of photographs. I took over 250,000 photographs last year. Lots of video, audio recordings. And I maintained an active Facebook page and Instagram during the year as well.
And your website's 418 Parks, right?
The website is 418parks.com.
Yeah. You say you recorded stuff, audio recording. What was that about?
Well, I wanted to chronicle the trip in as many ways as I could, just in case I wanted to produce something on the back end, a podcast or a book or a video or any number of options. So I just sort of made it a habit of collecting all kinds of data. And as it turns out, I generated over 4 terabytes of data last year with images and recordings and everything.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're not a professional photographer per se.
Not as such. I'm a professional artist, but photography has mostly just been a hobby for me for years, well, many years, but I wouldn't call myself a professional.
Okay. Well, so you started this a year ago, you just finished it. When did the idea first come to you, and how did that happen?
In 2018, I had a sort of a rough year and kind of was going through, you might call midlife crisis, something like that. So I decided for myself I needed a bit of a break and I needed to do something different, adventurous. I've always been very passionate about the national park system. For many years, I spent most of my vacation time traveling to national parks and camping and hiking and taking photographs and things like that. So it wasn't unfamiliar to me. It was very familiar territory, actually. So my family and I sort of came up with this harebrained idea to take the whole year off and see if you could visit all 418 units. And so that was the goal, and I never really gave it that much thought beyond that. I did a little bit of research before the trip, of course, and a lot of planning, but that was about it. So.
But you mentioned your family, but you went by yourself, didn't you?
I did go by myself. Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason for that? Or?
Wanted to have some time alone.
You had a whole year alone.
Had a whole year. Mm-hmm.
Well, so altogether, I'm assuming you took more than one photograph at every park.
Yeah, yeah. Anything from a few dozen photographs to a few thousand photographs at every park.
A few thousand?
Yep.
Wow.
I had a camera stuck to my face most of the time. Yeah.
Well, why don't we? Well, let me say this before we look at one of the images. It began here in St. Louis. Did you visit any parks in St. Louis? Was that the first park?
I started out, I live in St. Louis, of course, but I started out driving from St. Louis to Key West. Now, if you remember, I started in January, so it's cold here in St. Louis,
right.
And I wanted to begin the trip in a part of the country where it was a little more pleasant. So a couple of days before New Year's Day, I drove down to Key West and began my journey there.
Boy, that drive up through the islands is incredible, isn't it?
It is, and it just having a couple of days solid on the road, getting out of town and going to another place, kind of clears the slate and gets you prepared for something new.
I have a hard time starting Key West because I wouldn't want to leave.
Well, Key West is a really fun place, and it's a beautiful place. And I got to spend New Year's Eve there with about 10,000 other revelers, and it was a lot of fun. It was a good kickoff for the trip.
You all became best friends the next day, right?
All best friends, right?
That's what I thought. Why don't we look at the first image, and you can tell us, and of course we're not going to see something from all 418 parks today. So you've just chosen a few you'd like to share with us.
That's right, I've just chosen a few to highlight the trip. So this is a photograph of Dry Tortugas National Park. And this is the first stop on my trip. This was New Year's Day, 2019.
So this is Key West or near it?
No, this is about 80 miles west of Key West. A lot of people think that Key West is the last island in the Keys.
I was just going to say that.
But there are actually a couple of more if you go a little farther west.
So tell me about that, what we were looking at.
Dry Tortugas is a small island, and it's mostly occupied by Fort Jefferson. Fort Jefferson predates the Civil War. It was used also during the Civil War. But Fort Jefferson is the largest brick constructed building anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. And it's the ruins are still there, and you can see them. And also at the park, there's beautiful beaches and beautiful coral reefs. It's a fantastic place to visit, both because it has a lot of nature and it also has a lot of history as well.
Let's go to the next one.
So shortly, before I began the trip, we had a government shutdown.
And that would affect national parks?
That would affect national parks. So I had done months of planning and preparation, was all geared up to leave for the trip, and then the government closed. So that shut down a lot of national parks, most of them in fact. My first week when I got down to Florida, I got really lucky because the big parks down there were open because there was a nonprofit organization that was staffing them and keeping them open. But then after I toured around the Caribbean to the American Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, came back to Florida, and that's when I started to run into closed parks. And the government shutdown persisted, and it dragged on and on for the majority of January. So most of that first month of my trip, I drove from almost the East Coast to almost the West Coast, visiting closed parks. So I would run into, like in that photograph, I would run into barricaded entryways, padlocked gates, shuttered visitor centers, those type of things. And that was very frustrating because I was trying to achieve this goal, right. And I was under a time constraint as it was to fit in more parks than there are days in the year.
Politics again.
Politics
See how
again,
it always comes
right.
up, but we're going to avoid that topic today.
That's good.
Okay. Let's look at the next image.
By the time I got to New Mexico, the government had reopened, and this is an image of White Sands National Monument, which is now renamed White Sands National Park.
That doesn't look like it's in this country.
I know, it's a beautiful place. I'd been there many times before, but I had a really nice visit there during right as the sun was setting, got some great light for photographs. And it was really nice to finally be able to start visiting these places the way you're supposed to, the way they're meant to be. So after that, no more government shutdowns. So I was able to carry on. And I actually managed to squeeze in enough time to go back and visit all of the parks that were closed during January. There were about 30 of them.
Wow. Let's take a look at another one. 418 parks.
This is Death Valley National Park in California. This was a park that I had never been to before and had been wanting to go for a long time. And I camped there for 3 nights. Really gorgeous place, and I was kind of floored by the beauty of it.
I bet you should write a whole nother book about the people you met along the way. I'm just guessing you did.
I met all kinds of people all along the way, like every kind of American you can imagine, from retirees to families with little kids, lots of foreign tourists. There's always foreign tourists at our national parks. They're very, very popular, and park rangers, of course, everywhere, and then. At hotel bars and restaurants.
I was just going to bring that up.
You meet all kinds of interesting characters.
Mm-hmm. You could write a book just about that, I think.
I could.
All right. Well, we've got more to look at. We're talking with Andy Magee about 418 parks, and we'll share more of that with you when we come back.
So when we said, where do we start? For me, it was that warmth and love. It said, let's start in St. Louis.
You're watching STL TV.
Operation Wonder Park is a go!
There's nothing more powerful than imagination. But don't just imagine. Use STEM to change the world.
Who's with me?
Oh, it's gonna hurt tomorrow.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
nailed it.
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner, and we're talking to Andy Magee today. He's just completed a year-long project called 418 Parks, where he left St. Louis in January of 2019 and traveled across the country for 1 year, visiting all 418 national parks. And there are 419 now, but there were
That's right.
418 when you did it. And Andy, just a little background. You've lived in St. Louis a long time, and people may have heard of Cho-Chi's Picture Mart, because that's a business that's been around a long time.
That's right.
It's a family business that you've been involved with, so give me a little resume there.
It's a small custom picture framing business in Kirkwood. We're celebrating our 50th year in business this year. And I'm a third generation picture framer. It's sort of in the blood, and have been working at the shop for over 20 years now.
You mentioned you are an artist. What kind of artist are you?
I do mostly sculpture and some painting.
And do you have a gallery, or what do you do with your work?
I don't. I make it and it goes into storage. Sometimes I show here and there, but not very frequently.
So 418 parks, and you have a website, 418 Parks. And so what about a coffee table book someday?
Maybe. I'm considering a lot of different options, but I haven't had a chance to sit down and go through all the data that I generated last year. So when that time comes, I'll figure out what I have.
You should call Reedy Press.
Okay.
We'll talk later.
All right.
All right. So you visit all these parks. What you've chosen are just some of them to share with us, daily photographs of some of the parks you visited across the country. So let's take a look at the next one. And everyone has a story.
This is Grand Canyon National Park. It's probably familiar to many people, and I'd been there many times before this visit last year. But I made a special trip out of the way because there was a winter storm coming to Grand Canyon, and I'd never seen the canyon covered in snow. And so I made a special, somewhat hazardous trip up to Grand Canyon just to see it covered in snow.
What kind of vehicle did you take?
I took a full-size Chevy pickup on the trip. I wanted a vehicle that could carry all my gear, my camping gear, and my mountain bike, and also wanted something with high clearance and four-wheel drive, so I could get into places that you can't get a car into.
And how many miles, you told us earlier, did you put on it?
About 72,000.
72,000 miles. Any vehicle problems along the way?
Nothing major, minor stuff that you might assume. You know, when you put that many miles on a car, you know, you're bound to have a few things, but no, the vehicle did very well.
Okay, good. Let's take a look at another image from 418 Parks.
This is ancestral Pueblo in ruins called White House Ruins, and this is at the bottom of Canyon de Chelly National Monument in Arizona. The Four Corners region has quite a few parks that are dedicated to Native American history and culture in the United States, and these are very important parts of our national park system and our American history.
I loved how, speaking of your photograph there, how that green from the tree contrasted.
Right, it's a beautiful, beautiful place, and I've been there several times before too, and I always get really excited about going there and photographing just because the light's beautiful, the canyon is red and brown, and the trees, the cottonwood trees are green, and it's really picturesque.
Let's go to the next one.
This is one of my favorite parks, and it's a little lesser known. This is Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park in Colorado. I know a lot of people haven't. It's an extraordinarily dramatic landscape feature on the western slope of Colorado. The canyon is very, very deep and very, very narrow, and it's a real sight to behold. The term breathtaking is often thrown around, but until you really experience loss of breath because of something that you're seeing, you don't understand what that word means. And I get that sensation.
You're
every
being
time I
literal.
go there. I'm being literal, yeah. Very literal.
That's amazing. Let's go to the next one.
This is Grand Teton National Park, another one of my perennial favorites. It's such a picturesque landscape in Wyoming. And every time I go there, it's just staggering beauty. A good place to see wildlife as well.
Really? Anything in particular?
Lots of bears, moose, lots of elk, things like that.
Being national parks, I guess there was never any fee involved anywhere you went, was there?
Some parks do charge an admission fee. There's about 100 or 110 of them charge some type of entrance fee. Every year I always buy the National Park annual pass, and it costs $80, and it waives your admission to any park. So last year I really got my money's worth on.
But you buy that every year anyway.
I buy it every year anyway. It's my way of just making a small contribution every year to the National Park Service.
Let's see another image from 418 parks.
In the middle of the year, in the summer, I drove the truck up to Alaska to visit the 25 parks in the big state of Alaska. And I'd never been to Alaska before, but it was such an extraordinary visit. This is an image from Wrangell St Elias National Park and Preserve. This is our largest national park. It's 5 times larger than Yellowstone National Park and twice the size of the state of Maryland. It's a vast wilderness expanse. It's got over 200 glaciers in the park. The mountains are enormous. There's one glacier in the park alone that's larger than the state of Rhode Island. So trying to sort of wrap your mind around the enormity and the magnitude of a landscape like that is kind of an interesting challenge.
How many national parks does Missouri have?
Oh, that's a good question. There's 6 or 8, I believe.
Is that
We have
the
2
norm?
here in St. Louis. We've got Gateway Arch National Park,
Right.
and we've got Ulysses S. Grant National Historic Site out just in the county.
Are there some states that just have 1 or 2?
There's a small handful of states that only have 1 or 2, yeah. But most states have several.
All right, let's look at another national park that you visited.
Also in Alaska, this is Aniakchak National Monument. It's a 6-mile wide volcanic crater. It's a half a mile deep, and it's in the middle of nowhere on the Alaska Peninsula. This is the least visited of all 419 national park units. It gets an average of 100 visitors a year.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. The reason for that, and like many other parks in Alaska, there are no roads that go there, so you can't drive. So you have to hire a pilot with a bush plane, in this case a float plane, to fly you out into the middle of nowhere and land somewhere in the park.
Wow.
These are real wilderness areas, and the park has zero infrastructure. So there's no roads, no trails, no signage of any kind, no visitor center, no restrooms, no electricity, no cell phone signal, no GPS. And it's you and what you brought with you and the pilot, and that's the only thing there.
And that's why there's 100 people a year there.
That's right. The other reason that's one of the least visited park is because the weather is perpetually horrible, and it's bad enough that the pilots won't fly in there. So I got very, very lucky, and I didn't have to wait around very long for a good day, and I was able to make a trip out there.
Let's look at the next one. Wow.
This is coastal brown bear in Lake Clark National Park in Alaska.
Now you took this, so obviously this was not staged. Were you just there and this happened?
I was there on a boat with a couple of other tourists cruising around the lake, spotting bears. The bears were there fishing for salmon, and they spend all their daytime, all their waking hours during the summer fishing salmon and eating them. And they'll eat, 20, 18-pound salmon a day. It's amazing to watch.
Seeing that bear just made me think about dangerous situations in all those parks you visited, whether it was wildlife or the edge of a cliff. Any scary moments during the whole year?
There, every day was filled with dangerous situations, and you just sort of take it all in stride. But you have to have your wits about you, especially when you go into some of these more wilderness areas. And so you have to be informed, you have to be prepared, you have to know how to interact with a landscape that's filled with bears. In one of the parks in Alaska, when you land there, you actually have to go through bear orientation training by the National Park Service before they let you out onto the trails. So it's important, but But yeah, it's not. I wouldn't call it frightening or anything like that, as long as you're prepared and aware.
So you didn't have any close calls?
Not by bears, no. There's some other wildlife encounters that I had last year that maybe were a little closer than comfort, but.
Anything come to mind real quick? Or?
There was a one day when I inadvertently hiked into the middle of a herd of bison, and I know better than that. I'm experienced enough to know better, but I didn't foresee what I was getting into by the time I got there. And fortunately, nothing happened. But it was that was the only real situation last year that really got my heart pounding.
No bruises or anything?
No bruises, no.
All right. Let's look at another image from 418 Parks.
This is after Alaska, I got back down to the lower 48, and this is a photograph of Flight 93 National Memorial in Pennsylvania. And
From 9/11, right?
From 9/11, that's right. This is a relatively new park where they've constructed a glorious memorial to the 40 passengers and crew of Flight 93. And if people remember, that's the only one of the 4 hijacked planes on September 11 that did not hit its intended target,
right,
because the crew overtook the hijackers. It's a very moving memorial, and it's I think a very important place to visit.
We've got a couple more.
This is a photograph of a cannon demonstration at Antietam National Battlefield. A large part of the national park system is dedicated to the history of the United States, and within that, there are many sites dedicated to understanding the Civil War. And I was really sort of shocked at how much American history I was able to learn last year, even for someone who felt like they kind of had a good grasp on things. But until you go to these places and see them firsthand, you can touch the artifacts. You can walk the trails and the battlefields where tens of thousands of soldiers died, and you can learn the personal stories and the way that that event in particular affected individuals and families and communities, and still has resonating effects in our country today.
We have a limited time left, so comment on this one.
So in December, I took a trip out to the Pacific to visit the parks there, and this is a photograph of the National Park of American Samoa. The trip took me to all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and 4 United States territories.
That's something familiar.
And I wrapped up the trip on New Year's Eve back home here at Gateway Arch National Park.
How appropriate. New Year's Eve. Did you toast yourself for coming home and all that?
I didn't. I had my park visit at the Gateway Arch, and then I took a nap.
Wow. Well, Andy Magee, let's remind people, if they go to your website, 418 Parks, is that the best way to look at what you've done?
That is, 418parks.com will take you to my website. From there, you can link to 418 Parks on Facebook or Instagram.
Andy, thanks so much. What a great trip. You've inspired me.
Thank you very much,
I may
Steve.
do a small version of that someday.
I hope so. I hope so.
It's been fun talking to you.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching City Corner. Join us next time. I'm Steve Potter. See you.